So welcome everyone. This is the second session in the Disability Festival that we're holding across Bradford and Craven District. Obviously, as you join, just introduce yourself during the chat. It's great to see as many of you joining. We are recording this session, so you will be able to look at this one and play back, and also the others if you're not able to make them. So there's a great variety on this week, so it'd be great to see as many as you can. Unfortunately, myself and Jo was going to be joined by Sarah Hayes, who's the wellbeing lead in Airedale. Unfortunately, she's not well today, so you just stuck with me and Jo to take you through these slides today. I'll introduce myself and then I'll pass you on to Jo. So I'm Freya Sledding, I'm Chief Allied Health Profession at Airedale, and I do co-chair the Enable Staff Network with Jo. We jointly do that duty. I'm an occupational therapist by background, so return to work, vocation, all those things and disability are so important to me professionally. And it's something I'm really passionate about, trying to get our workforce to feel safe, that people safe to disclose disability, and that we eventually have a workforce that reflects our populations that we serve. And we know that I think it's about 25% of the working population that have a long-term condition or disability, and we know we're not quite there with some of our organisations around that. Let me pass over to Jo to introduce herself, and then we'll start the slides.
Hi everybody, I'm Jo Barkwith. I am a Deputy Pathology Quality Manager at Airedale, although as a reasonable adjustment because of my disability, I work remotely. I am actually based near Stockton-on-Tees, so my nearest hospital is James Cook, Darlington or North Tees, so I'm a long way away from you guys at Airedale, but I'm definitely one of the team at Airedale. So as Freya said, we co-chair the Enable Staff Network group, and we've been doing that for just over a year now. I think it's about that, isn't it? Something like that. So we're welcome all staff into that group, whether you've got a disability or not. So we're keen to have allies in our group as well. So that's us really. So yeah, an OT and a biomedical scientist.
Yeah, and just to say that I've got a hidden disability, so I'm dyslexic as well, so that's another passion why I'm so passionate about supporting this network. So as Jo said, we're all from Airedale, but actually hopefully people from wider organisations, because this has been a partnership across Bradford and Craven District. So although we'll speak about what happens in Airedale, the learning is transferable to any organisation that you're working in. So please just take the learning and apply it to your own organisation, your own workplace. So today the presentation, we've got a few slides and then we'll have some time for open questions. So please feel free, if you've got questions to ask, then do that. But the presentation today will be focused on the people that are working already in our services. So the people that are joining our services within the workforce that have a disability, and those people that maybe develop or acquire a disability throughout their work life. There is lots more around disability that we need to do around attracting people with disabilities, improving the recruitment process for people with disabilities, and we acknowledge these processes need to be more inclusive. But today we're focusing on our current workforce and how to maximise the support that you can give your employees or yourself around that. Next slide.
So
go on, Jo, you go.
What is a disability? I think that's quite key to really identify what is a disability. The Equality Act from 2010 says if you have a physical or mental impairment that has substantial and long-term negative effect on ability to do normal daily activities. So then there's a couple of definitions there: substantial, more than minor or trivial, and it can take longer to do things, daily tasks like getting dressed. Now, for me, I have MS and it takes me about 30 minutes, 35 minutes to get dressed in the morning. So that I'm sure is a lot longer than able-bodied people, although some of my friends, sometimes I do wonder. Long term means more than 12 months or more. So breathing condition as a result of lung infection, which is obviously quite key at the moment with long COVID. And I know there are some people on this session that struggle with long COVID, or at least work with people who have long COVID. So that's something that's quite key at the moment. But disabilities can be obvious. Mine is a physical disability. I'm a wheelchair user. So if you saw me out and about in town, you would definitely recognise that I have a disability because I have a wheelchair. There are obviously lots of hidden disabilities, autism, some mental health disorders, neurodivergence. There's a raft of hidden disabilities as well. So we need to be mindful that the hidden disabilities can also fall under the Equality Act. There are some that automatically qualify. Cancer on diagnosis, you are then considered to have a disability. If you have MS, you also are considered to have a disability, and if you're diagnosed with HIV. And I'm sure there are other things that the 2010 Disability Act, if it's ever updated, may very well be added. But at the moment, it's cancer on diagnosis, MS and HIV. But actually, the diagnosis itself isn't really important. It's the effects that that diagnosis or that condition has on us and our staff within our district. What impact does that disability have on their daily life? What impact does it have on their working life? There are some difficulties with getting a diagnosis, as we all know, working within the health service. There are many backlogs to diagnosis, and autism is a key one, classic one there, a 3-year wait for adult diagnosis of autism. Remission continues to be continued to be considered a disability. So patients who have relapsing remitting MS, for instance, while they are in remission, they are still considered to have a disability. And patients who are on cancer treatment and they are in remission from their cancer, that's also still considered to be a disability. So we need to be mindful that some remissions also consider class people as being disabled. So this is the next couple of slides are just a graphic that I can't quite remember where it came from, Freya, because it come from the I think it came from National Health England, is it? So in the UK, 83% of people require their disability through their working lives, which is something that if anybody was in the first session, Mark Doughty was saying from the King's Fund, a lot of people acquire their disability during their working life. BAME disabled people have greater social inequalities, and there's other stats on there that you can read there. This is the other one. Oh, it's from NHS employers. So other long-term conditions which are classed as a disability, so heart disease, stroke, mental health conditions, diabetes, and neurodiverse conditions, autism, dyslexia, dyspraxia, and other such things. So there's quite a long list of things that could be considered to be classed as a disability.
And I think that's the point that we hear in our disability focus group is people maybe have long-term conditions but don't view themselves as disabled, but actually under this legislation they are, and I think that's sometimes the negative connotation of feeling disabled and the language around it. But I think it's really important to recognise it's not a long list of this is in and this is out. It's those definitions that Jo said in the beginning around it being substantial, more than 12 months, and affecting you in the activities you do every day. So think broader than maybe what you think a disability is.
Or its diagnosis.
Yes, yeah. Definitely. So just talked about some examples there. Really, some are really obvious. You see Jo, she's down in a wheelchair or scooting across the place in a scooter. You might have a stick. Those sorts of things are obvious, but as Jo said, there's a really wide range of hidden disabilities that maybe aren't as obvious to see. Put some examples within there. It's not endless, but people maybe not know that you've got a disability when you've got one of these conditions. And Jo's made a nod to the huge variety of symptoms that people with long COVID have, that is having an effect on people returning to work after that diagnosis. I think the most important thing is not two people are the same. Each person's disability is different and affects them in their own unique way. I can have a conversation with someone with dyslexia, but actually the things that I experience are very different to the next person. The levels, what I can do and what I can't do might be very different. And the same with Jo and her condition. There are similarities, but there's also very differences. And it affects you because of what you do and your roles within life and what you do in your job and what you do outside of work, really. So I think it's that personalisation piece is really important to get across, and really to ask people, you know, how does it affect you? What do you struggle with? What do you find easy? What do you not find at all easy? And the language we use, I know in the chat people are talking about the connotations of language and disability, really, and how people think about that. I hear in my work people talking about conditions rather than people, and we're all people with a condition. So it's really important to think about the language they use and the impact that has on people. But then I would say, you know, we're not experts in everything. We're always asked about our lived experience, but it's how it's affected us. You know, if people have got a disability, be curious, ask. I'm sure people wouldn't think bad of people asking some questions and saying, actually, there's a gap in my knowledge. I'm really interested to hear how it affects you. So that's how we learn. And I think just assuming things can be quite dangerous. So be curious is what I would say about disability. Ask people about it. And also, like people without disabilities, our ability in everyday activities varies within things. When people are stressed, people perform less. When people haven't slept, when they've got things going on in their life. So there is variation. So some days someone with a condition will be not have any issues with anything that they're doing. The next day it might look very different. So think about that variation piece as well.
Mia's just put something in the chat here. Actually, I wish people would ask more than think they know it all, as they often do.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Absolutely.
That goes back to that. Making assumptions is dangerous, or it can be dangerous. You assume that somebody can or can't do something, and yeah, it's not great. So yeah, thanks for that comment, Mia.
Right. And just to remember, the people with the disabilities are usually they're experts in themselves and know how to best manage the condition, know what triggers the condition, know what they need to have help. So actually, you know, don't assume, ask is what we're saying. People with disabilities often experience more guilt and psychological distress because they have a disability. And that impacts on them having to work with a disability. We know some days this might be questionable, but we know work is good for us. People that work longer in life, stay healthy, have a better life expectancy. We know that it keeps us healthy and active. So we should be encouraging people to work a long work life as well as they can. So I think that's really important to know. I'll go on the next slide. It's great that you put all these comments in the chat. We'll try and pull some of them out of the end.
Yeah.
I'm just going to fly past the WDES. WDES stands for the Workforce Disability Equity Standard, and this is 10 metrics that each health organisation has to report on nationally. And it compares the experience of someone disabled compared with someone not disabled. So it looks at our recruitment processes, it looks about capability, bullying, harassment, and really compares. And actually, if you look, have a Google in your organisation of or ask someone what is our WDES data, and you'll be astonished really about the differences that people with a disability face compared to people without a disability. And I suppose one of the aims of doing things today is to really improve that awareness and to improve it for people that have disabilities. So actually, they're not on a back foot, that they have the same experience, and equality is for all of us. So there are others, but that gives you a flavour. But there will be another session on WDES if you're really interested in it later in the week. So we'll go on to the next slide. I think the take-home message about that is that a motivated, included, valued workforce helps deliver high patient care, increases satisfaction and patient safety. So we know if we get it right for our workforce, actually we get it right for our patients, and we're in a better position to deliver high quality, safe care. So it's really important that we do that. Right, so you've come to one about reasonable adjustment. What do you think constitutes a reasonable adjustment? So if you can maybe put some examples in the chat box, that would be really useful, because there's a wide range of different reasonable adjustments that could be put in place for people with disabilities.
If you don't want to type, you can take yourself off mute and actually say them out loud. That would be fine. Are we getting any?
Yeah. I actually got some reasonable adjustments offered in an unusual way. Basically, it was at an airport for airport security.
Yes.
As an autistic trans woman, I have issues with my body. So when these body scanners came out at airports, I became too afraid to fly to India to see an elderly relative. And I tried speaking out. Yes. I started speaking out in 2010, but I found myself subjected to a 10-year hate campaign by people accusing me of putting passenger safety at risk with my asking for adjustments. And it was nearly 10 years in 2019 when I finally got a meeting at Manchester Airport, just because nobody would help me. Until then, everybody told me things like, oh, you need to take therapy so you can adjust to that. Or they even told me some really inappropriate things, like going to nudist speeches or telling me why I wasn't trans or becoming a life model, and really inappropriate things.
Yeah.
And so, but they were able to make the adjustments I needed. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to make the trip because the airports in India never responded to my advocate. So there was no joined up thinking.
Yeah.
But it's like, if I had the right support earlier here, then I'd have had more time to sort of appeal to the airports in India.
Yeah, that's a good example of reasonable adjustments that are not work related, that they're not within our everyday working life. So yes, thank you very much for sharing that, Mia. And there's been a really few bits and pieces coming in.
Some good examples, isn't there, from technology right through to working patterns. And I think sometimes people really focusing on what equipment you need in place, and actually it can be about starting a bit sooner, working different hours, having more regular breaks, them sorts of things. So yeah, people have really started to capture those in the chat, which is really nice.
Yeah, we'll try and pull some of those together maybe towards the end. So okay, so we're going to move now on to sort of more about reasonable adjustments in our presentation. So I think this is quite a common image. It's a little out of focus. I couldn't find one that was in focus. Apologies. It's not your eyesight. It is definitely out of focus. Now I've seen it quite a lot, but I've usually only seen reality, equality, equity. You don't often see it with the justice on the end. So this shows it's a very good way of showing what equality is and equity is. So everybody should be able to see the baseball game in this instance by the looks of things, and things can be put in place to make it easier for people. And it's not about treating everybody exactly the same, because that means that everybody's being treated equally, but then in the second image, two people, or certainly one person, still can't see the game very well. So that's not really equality, even though you're treating everybody the same. So it's quite a powerful image that's available on the interweb. So it's quite a lot. I found it quite a powerful image.
Yeah, it's really good to explain, because I think people are scared about making reasonable adjustments because they feel that they have to do the same for everyone, and that's not the same. Actually, everyone needs the support that they need in work, not what everyone needs, what they need, and that's the really important bit.
Yeah. So what is reasonable adjustment? Any alteration of or accommodation necessary to enable a disabled individual to have the opportunity to demonstrate their abilities. So it's about allowing disabled people to bring their best selves to work, giving them bits of equipment or adaptations to their work role, or the times that they might come in and leave, or more breaks, to allow them to use all of the skills that you employed them for. And everybody has those skills, and we just need to support people to be able to use those skills in the best way possible in their work life, which then has a knock-on effect of improving life for everybody. As an employer, that you have a duty of care to make reasonable adjustments to practices and premises if they place a disabled person at a substantial disadvantage as compared to a non-disabled person. So employers have a duty to make those reasonable adjustments. So what does reasonable mean? The Act does not provide a definition, so it basically takes into account the cost of the adjustment, the interests of others, health and safety factors, and whether the competency standards are maintained. So if completely altering the building to make an adaptation becomes prohibitively expensive, then that's when it might not be possible to do it. But there might be other things that can be done to support that individual working from another site or whatever. So reasonable is a difficult one to interpret, but that's what it often takes into account. Okay.
Jo's really proud of this.
My little cute carrot, yeah.
Cute carrot with the walking aid. So yeah, I suppose there's two ways of looking at why we should put reasonable adjustments into place. And first, it's the carrot. So if we go on to the next slide, so the benefits of putting reasonable adjustments into work are vast, really. And I think if we put reasonable adjustments in for people with disabilities, we make the whole work environment and culture more accessible to everyone. It enables everyone to bring the best self to work. We don't come to work to struggle. We come to work to bring our best self to work, and that's what reasonable adjustment should be. It's like that picture that Jo's talked about. It gives us all the support we need to do our job well. They always have a benefit of the toilet. We talk about adaptation of a disabled toilet. Actually, you know, if that's in a workplace, then anyone visiting that place has the benefit of doing that. I always think ramps for wheelchair users are a really good example, that actually if you're pushing a buggy round, then that makes it easier. Or, you know, carrying something up, you're not having to look at the steps, so that they usually benefit other people as well. What's really important to me is that it increases the diversity of our workforce. It means that the best person with the best skills gets that job, and it's not just that people without disabilities are therefore not able to do the jobs that we know that they can do them. And research shows that it really increases engagement with our workforce and our patient groups if we put these reasonable adjustments in place. So I would all like you to, and obviously attracts people to come into the organisation with disabilities. They see the organisation as a supporting organisation, and it helps keep people in work. As Jo's alluded to, many people are in a job and then acquire a disability, so it keeps those people in work for as long as possible, really. So I would like us all to follow the carrot, really, but there is a stick if the carrot isn't strong enough, isn't there, Jo? And Jo's going to take you through the stick.
Yeah. So how big is this stick? How much is this going to affect what employers do? employers have to take steps to take account of a person's disability, as we've said before, about making reasonable adjustments, even if that means treating that individual more favourably. It doesn't mean treating everybody the same. You can treat some people differently if it's taking account of their disability to allow them to stay into work or make their working life much more pleasant to be in and not so much of a struggle. Failure to make reasonable adjustment when under a duty to do so treats the Equality Act treats that as discrimination, and then you may be liable to pay damages, and those damages are uncapped. So that could run into the millions of pounds for an organisation if they are prosecuted for not making a reasonable adjustment when they had a duty to do so. So it's really quite a big stick. But as Freya said, we really want people to follow the carrot and not the stick. Failing to make people aware of adjustments may also be considered the same as not making the adjustment at all. So if the organisation doesn't say that adjustments are available or how to do it or who to contact or how it works, then that can also be considered to be discrimination and not the same and the same as not making that adjustment at all. So that would also lead to potential prosecution and those uncapped damages. So it is quite a big stick with quite a lot of teeth. But as Freya said, we want people to use the carrot approach rather than the stick approach, because the carrot was cute. So how do we do it? Well, the first thing we need to do is we need to know that the individual has a disability. And we know within Airedale there is some resistance for people to declare their disability. And that comes in many different forms and for many different reasons. We're trying to foster a supportive and inclusive environment to facilitate that disclosure. We've got the Enable Staff Network group, and there's other things that have been put into place to help foster that environment. The individual then can identify support that's required. That can be done by EH and WB, which is our employee health and wellbeing team, or it can be done through Access to Work or a combination of both. And the employee health team will help individuals with their Access to Work applications and processes.
Just coming in there, because I think Access to Work is something that people struggle with, in the sense of it has to be the individual that refers yourself. So if you want that support, you can't just be referred by your manager or employer health and wellbeing. You need to be active in that process.
Yeah, you can ask for help to do it,
yes.
But you're the one that has to do the application. And then as part of that, you need to agree what the responsibility is, who has what responsibility. Does the manager have the responsibility? Does the individual? Does the employee health? So it's all involved in that. Everybody should be involved, really. It's important that you build in regular reviews. I had some reasonable adjustments made, which I'll come on to a bit later, but they are reviewed regularly. My boss and I have conversation very regularly about whether those adaptations and adjustments are still fit for purpose, and if they're not, then we would go back through the Access to Work process if necessary or change things up again. So it's important that regular reviews with that individual are had, just to make sure that those adjustments are still fit for purpose. And the important thing is, once the adjustments have been agreed, that those adjustments are put into place as soon as possible. So don't agree, yes, you can have whatever it is, and then it take months and months and months for that thing or that piece of equipment or that adaptation to arrive. It's important to that member of staff, that person, that these adaptations are put in place as quickly as possible. So this is a bit of information about Access to Work. It can help you stay in work if you've got a physical disability or a mental health condition. They can provide all sorts of things. They will have an interview with you and see what would work best. It might be providing taxis for you to get to work if you find it difficult to use public transport for whatever reason. So there's all sorts of things they can help with. They can give a grant for practical support. They contributed towards my electric scooter, which I have been seen scooting, hurtling about on the hospital corridors. They can help with managing mental health. They can pay for communication for job applications and interviews if necessary. So there's a wide range of things that Access to Work can help. It's limited by your imagination only, really. There's all sorts of things that can be provided by Access to Work. So it's definitely worth a conversation with them if you are struggling with anything. Back to you, Freya.
So, yeah, I'll just talk about what Airedale's doing, but I'm sure most organisations are looking at support for people with disabilities, and actually there's nothing in this guidance document that wouldn't work for other areas, really. So Airedale have done a lot of work on trying to improve that culture of disclosing, so that when people have disclosed their disability, people then can then get the help that they need and the guidance. So I've done some work on reasonable adjustment guide and toolkit, and this is a really thorough guide and toolkit that's available for the individual to guide them through the step-by-step approach, but also it's a really good resource for managers. So people that are supporting people in teams, that they really need to have a look at it and see what's in it and how it can be guided. And it's a really 5-step simple process about identifying the need, preparing for it, meet and explore, agree and act, and then constantly review. So it's a 5-point part that is cyclical, as Jo's talked about. Within that guide, there is an adjustment passport, and this is a passport that then you can fill in with your reasonable adjustments in place and what's been agreed, and then you can review them with your manager to make sure they're still meeting your needs. But I think an important part of it is that you can pick this passport up and take it to your new job, your new team, and say, this is what I had in place last time. We're not starting from scratch here. Or maybe when your manager moves on and you get a new manager, you can say, can I take you through my adjustment passport? And this is what's been agreed, and this is what is in place. How can you support me to continue with this? We've also done a lot of work on progress on updating declarations on ESR, and that's really important so that we can see how many people that are employed in the organisation with disabilities, and that we can recognise their needs and their voice within that. And like today, like this training and awareness session, we're doing training for managers to upskill them in dealing with people with disabilities. If disabilities isn't your lived experience, or you've not come across it, you might really struggle to know how to best support someone in those roles. So it's really important that people get the support they need to be able to support the people in their teams the best.
For sure. So the Access to Work, this is my case study. So it was actually November 2018 that I made the application via Access to Work, and Daryl's put that Access to Work information in the chat if anybody's interested. Thank you very much, Daryl. So I applied and filled in the application form. That was in the November. And then they got back in touch with me, and I had a face-to-face meeting with the Access to Work representative and my line manager, who is incredibly supportive of getting access to adjustments for me, and that has helped massively, having a very supportive manager. And it's supportive, in fact, the whole pathology department are fantastic with my disability. So yeah, they're great. So we discussed options, what sorts of things did I need, what would make my life more easy. So we agreed on a low travel keyboard, which is, rather than the standard NHS keyboards, which have the keys have got, you have to push them down quite hard, quite a long way to get a letter appear on your screen, whereas a low travel keyboard is much more like a laptop keyboard, so you don't have to press the keys quite so far down. So I have MS, and sometimes my fingers, or in fact all the time now, my fingers don't work very well. So having a low travel keyboard has made my life much easier to be able to type. We also went with an upright mouse, which is the one that's on the screen there, which again has made things a lot easier. It's just a lot easier for me and my arm to move around. but we also agreed on a mobility scooter because from where I parked from pathology to the education centre in Airedale is 1/2 mile walk. Now that really wasn't very possible for me at the time, so we needed, and education was being held in the education centre. This is obviously pre-COVID, so I needed a scooter to get up there. So I've got a scooter. So it all happened very quickly. So November the application was made, and then by December the mouse and the keyboard was purchased by my line manager, and it arrived very, very quickly. I think they must have got it through Amazon or something. And then in the January, my scooter arrived, and the type of scooter was up to me. Access to Work gave me some suggestions, but then I did a whole load of research and found a scooter. So yeah, and then the scooter arrived in January, and that is my scooter, and I hurtled around the corridors, but I also use it outside of work. It's not limited to just being able to use it in work. So Access to Work paid a grant towards the purchase of the scooter, and then work paid for the rest of it. So it was about half and half. It was about £2,000. So it was £1,000 each approximately. So the keyboard and the mouse wasn't that expensive. So since then, COVID hit, and I am now working from home on a permanent basis. So another reasonable adjustment was made, more conversations with my line manager and how best to manage that. So I now work from home and conduct all of my training and meetings and stuff via the medium of Teams. And Teams has been an absolute godsend, because before COVID and before Teams, it would have been very, very difficult for me to work from home and still be able to do my job effectively. But because I am massively claustrophobic, I couldn't come on site because I couldn't wear a face mask, and there was no exceptions made. So I now work from home permanently, which I like. It has its plus points and its downsides. I don't have to fight the traffic in the morning. Although I have been known to be late for work, even though I've only got to go about 10 feet, but yeah, never mind. So yeah, that's my case study really, that it happened very quickly, and that was really positive. That was really positive. It was overall, it was a very positive experience.
I just, in contrast, I want to share a case study. Obviously, Joe's case study was very physically based, and I wanted to share a case study that someone we've worked with within our own organisation, a medical colleague who had a diagnosis as autism, wanted some further support within their work, and this is really just their reflections on the situation, really, that actually from a practical point of view, having an agreed person to go to, which they identified as their supervisor, having a stable point of call, meeting regularly, understanding how that diagnosis impacts on that person individually, but also how it impacts on their work role, what it does. So that was a key part of it. Being able to work supernumerary, so not being counted in the numbers. I don't know how that works within other areas, but actually not having the pressure of being that person within the numbers to do it, but really working as a team to work together and learn and understand each other from that, really reduce the effect of the change. So having the process that I talked about, that 5-point process of meeting with colleagues, supervisors, wellbeing at work and HR leads in getting to that point of deciding what reasonable adjustments were needed in this person's case was really useful. And this person now uses noise cancelling headphones in clinical areas, which actually, you know, it is something that I'm not sure that people openly do that within other areas, and it's something that this person found really, really useful to be able to concentrate at work and put into place around that. Funding a laptop so that person could move from a very busy clinical area to a quieter area to allow them to do work. Some adaptations on the bleep and the pager, so they had a vibration mode, that the voice was adjusting, etc. and working hours, so being able to work part-time. I think sometimes we're not as flexible as we should be around people's particular roles, but this meant that this person worked 60% of their time, which is much better for this person, but actually we're getting 60% of someone staying in work. Without that, this person wouldn't be in work. And also setting rules as things develop. So having that open conversation with the person and the line manager around what's acceptable, what can we put in place, how do we maintain things to be calm. The next one. So like Joe, this person had an assessment from Access to Work. They got support from the Wellbeing at Work person within in writing that application, because I think even though you're there to refer yourself to Access to Work, sometimes it's really useful to have some support in doing it. From a point of that, they were able to give some coaching sessions from their application and some training, and that training really wasn't just for that person in how do I make the most of my skills within that workplace. It was about colleagues, so autism awareness training for the immediate team that person worked with. This person has now got the reasonable adjustment in place and it's recorded. They do keep it under regular review if anything changes in that person's condition or circumstances, and there's key triggers really where that should be looked at. And this person says it just avoids the stress of telling my story 20 times, actually, that the learning is in place and it's in place and people don't have to repeat the story. So that was really useful, and I think she's just put a quote on the next slide, Joe, that really wanted people to read and to take on board. So I won't read that out to you, but I think it just illustrates what the most useful thing this person felt was in that supporting that person in work.
Mandy's made a very good point in the chat actually about personal emergency egress plans, which certainly in Airedale we call personal emergency evacuation plan. Yes,
Yeah.
When I was working on site, I had a PEEP in place, and it was reviewed annually, or if something changed enough for us and my manager to think that it might need reviewing. And I had one in place for Airedale and I had one in place for Bradford, because within pathology works both at Airedale and Bradford. So I had a PEEP on both sites. So that's something to bear in mind. In pathology, we have a number of staff who are profoundly deaf, and they also have personal emergency plans in place. So if you do have somebody who is deaf or struggles to see or hear fire alarms, that is something very much worth bearing in mind. So thank you very much for that, Mandy.
Yeah, great, Mandy, thank you.
Yeah,
We'll
definitely.
go on to the next slide. I just want to get through the slide.
Mindful of time, yeah.
Yeah, mindful of time, and we want to.
We've got some top tips. I think the key one here is don't make assumptions, and there's been some comments in the chat there about people being infantilized because people are making assumptions about what they can and can't do. And I completely get that, because I personally have experienced that, not necessarily at work, but in the wider community for sure. So don't assume, ask, but respectfully ask. Have an open culture. We're working towards that at Airedale. We're trying to develop a clear understanding of people's needs, even if there is a reluctance for the individual. If we can publicise what can be put in place, then that will hopefully encourage other people to come forward and go, actually, do you know what, that would really help me. I think that's a really good idea. And then we can start that conversation with them. It is important. Confidentiality is massively important, because some people are reluctant to declare their disability because they don't want the rest of the team knowing that they have dyslexia or dyspraxia or whatever it is, or mental health issues. So confidentiality is key. Strengths-based approach. So in your teams, you employed these people because they are good at their jobs, that they have skills and attributes that you want in your team. So by having a strengths-based approach, you're supporting that person with their strengths and their ability to do that job. So you're putting in place things to support that person bringing their best self to work. Early intervention, we've said try and get it in as quickly as possible. Somebody's put in the chat that because of COVID, the access to work have a bit of a backlog. So that's just worth bearing in mind. I think it said about 16 weeks was, oh, you'll have to look back through the chat, but just bear that in mind. So if you can get something in place in the meantime, then do so. If you've got a team member who you think might be struggling a bit, so try and identify that distress, changes in behaviour, look for performance issues, tiredness, patterns of absences, stuff like that, and then have a confidential conversation with them about that and see if there's anything that can be put into place to help that individual. Any adjustments or anything like that has an impact on the rest of the team, so just bear in mind that it does have an impact on the rest of the team. And sometimes the rest of the team may need to be involved in those discussions, sometimes not, but it's just worth bearing in mind that it does have an impact on the rest of the team. Top tip, page 2. We need to make sure that reasonable adjustments is embedded into recruitment and the induction process. Now, we said we're not going to cover this very much, but both Freya and I are working behind the scenes at Airedale to make the recruitment and selection process as inclusive as we can. Freya's been involved in developing some training for managers, which is rolling out fairly soon, isn't it? It's important to have clear communication. That the second case study, I think, showed that it's important to have that clear communication, just so that everybody knows what's going on where it's appropriate. Consider returning to work, phased returns, and things put in place before somebody comes back. I think this is particularly important for things like long COVID, which is, obviously a thing at the moment, which is affecting quite a lot of people. Follow-up disability on the application forms, that goes back to making sure recruitment is fully accessible for everybody, regardless of what that is. Create a culture where ongoing difficulties, changes and new conditions are discussed. So we have several lived experiences, stories in our Enable group, and we're trying to encourage more people to come forward with their lived experiences because they're really, really powerful. And I think our board have found it quite powerful to listen to some of our lived experiences. So that can, if you can get lived experiences from people, sometimes you'll be shocked about the things that people have to experience, not just people with disabilities, but people from other protected characteristics like BAME or LGBTQ or even the gender. There are shocking things that come out of conversations about lived experience. It's also important to promote involvement in our staff networks. Both Freya and I are co-chairs of our disability network group, Enable, but we also have a rainbow network and a gender network and a race equality network available for all of our staff to get involved in, to use it as a safe space, to use their knowledge and experience within that as just to help support that individual. And explore deployment and an alternative employment if that becomes appropriate further down the line. So
this is hopefully to the point where you feel a bit more confident in knowing what support, knowing what resources are out there, knowing how to have those conversations. So hopefully people have learned something by attending today, and we'll be able to put it then into practice around supporting people within their own teams.
Or at least it's been thought-provoking for you guys to take it back to your teams and really have a think about how you can make your team more inclusive for people with disabilities. So this is our Enable network. Do you want to chat about that?
Yeah. Most of the organisations will have a network group for people and allies, really. I think that's really important, that it's just not made up of people with disabilities. It's made up of people that want to champion this and support this. So we're trying to create an environment where staff with disabilities feel valued and included. that we're enabling staff to be as productive and as happy as possibly in work, and that we support our own organisational inclusion priorities. As I said, allies are important in all staff network groups. We do meet monthly on Teams, and if you're not part of it, I would encourage you, if you're part of Airedale, to come forward and join us with some of those meetings and help us drive some of the improvements. But if not, you know, find out who's involved in this work in your organisation, or if not, could you get a few like-minded people together and start championing this?
Yeah, definitely. Our network's grown and grown, hasn't it, over the last year? We've got a lot of people involved with it now, and we're always looking for more members. So if anybody's here like to come along, our next meeting is in January, although we haven't got a date yet, have we? It's
No, it will
work
be
in progress. It will. So that's the end of our slides. So thank you very much for listening. Thank you for all of the comments in the chat. While I look back through the chat,
yeah,
is there anybody any questions?
Yeah.
Have you pulled? Okay, that's
yeah. If anyone wants specifically to ask a question, if they want to put their hand up now, and I'll call you in. If not, there's some themes in the chat that we can pull out. Is there anyone?
One, May has asked, how did you generate take-up of your networks? We have recently relaunched our networks, but there is very little take-up. This is something that the network groups in Airedale and Bradford and the area generally struggle with, is engagement, but we are getting better. Shaq was saying that Bradford, they've pulled together a video, haven't they, about working with the disability in Bradford. So that's had quite a positive effect on encouraging people to join the networks. We're doing a lot of promotion, aren't we?
Of a group,
comms.
yeah, and I think it's ease of access, isn't it? We've tried to look at, so you know, having a confidential email box that people can ask questions, and not have to do that in front of a whole group of people and ask for support. And also we've done a lot of, if you can't come to the meeting, then we do a bit of a talking heads feedback session later on, that people can know what we're talking about in the groups, and get in touch if they want to support a specific element that we're looking at,
without having to wade through written minutes, which can be a bit dry and dull. So yeah, we do a talking heads every month, don't we?
And I think Mandy just put his drip, isn't it? You know, we have seen an uptake, and actually probably the disability group is more engaged than maybe some of the other networks. So we learn from each other of what works and what doesn't work. But it's just being there for when people need you, and supporting the training and supporting where we're up to. There are a few questions about access to work in the chat around. Thank you, Mandy, for telling us that there's a bit of a delay, and I think, like most accessing services after COVID, there isn't there?
Yeah.
And there was a question around how do we get it put in quickly, and I think Joe's case study showed how quickly it can be put in place, and I know other organisations don't have do have some delays in their procurement service and getting things into place, agreeing funding. It's that stick stuff, you know. If we don't get in place in a timely fashion, then we're open to a claim really around that. So I think we have to find ways of doing that, and we've learned from case studies of what works and what doesn't. So really looking at that, highlighting good practice as well as poor practice. But it is, I think it's taking that legal element of it, that it is something that's not a nice to do, it's something that we have to do.
Yeah, there's a question in the chat about lanyards, a sunflower hidden lanyard, and Freya's replied, yes, we would support the wearing of sunflower lanyards. I'm quite fortunate because I work from home. I'm generally not required to wear a lanyard, which works well. But yes, I've seen some sunflower lanyards out and about in the community. Actually, not fairly recently, not actually on the hospital site, but yeah, definitely that's something that could be utilised.
I know our HR department have them if you, I know they're readily available, but if you need them, most of the HR departments would be able to get their hands on one for you. So that would be acceptable as well.
Going back to the second case study, May has asked, difficulty with patient perception that clinician was unprofessional to be listening to music whilst working. Difficulty if clinician with hidden disability does not wish to disclose to parents how to handle this.
I think that's hard, isn't it? And I think that's why we need to create a culture where we all are happy to disclose, so that people know you're not just listening to Radio 1 and getting on with things. You're actually doing it so you can do the best work you can do. So a lot of it is about education, and I know in society as a whole we see people with noise cancelling headphones at gigs, don't we, in sporting events. We need to replicate that within the workplace, don't we, so that it is more accessible in our workplace. So I would encourage people to be as open as they can, and if they can't be open to everyone, then within their immediate team, so that people can be aware of that's just how I work around here. That's just how that's one of my coping mechanisms.
Mandy's also asked, what's the process for access to work at your trust? Is it easy to access for staff? How do people know about it? Who manages it? A lot of NHS staff on the trials have shared that they've waited too long for their access to work equipment at non-cost adjustments, such as hidden adjusted sickness triggers with sickness policy. Yeah.
I think we are working on that. I'm not sure it's perfect, but I think we learn from each organisation. No one centralises it. It's a support function within HR. But also the individual has responsibilities for moving that forward, as well as the manager.
Sure. Yeah. Did you make any more notes on questions, Ro?
I think I've scanned through them. Is there anything new that we haven't covered in our last minute? Or there was just a question about slides and recordings. So the recordings will be available. I know Shaq's put something in the chat about making them widely available and promoting that. They'll be done after the festival. So I'd encourage you to have a look at everywhere. Mia, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, I was just wondering, do you ever have support available for people needing like non-work related adjustments and more unusual requests, like the one I spoke about earlier? Like, in the event of less common requests, a lot of people are made to feel that, oh, it's just us with a particular need or impairment, like nobody else has that. So I guess I feel very strongly there needs to be more sort of for people to know that they're not alone, and even if they are in that, in the sense that nobody else experiences what they do, then they will be listened to.
And I think that's the culture piece of moving towards that culture where people are recognised as being listened to and adjustments in place, isn't it? I think as an employer, the responsibility on reasonable adjustment talks about the reasonable adjustments in work, but actually, if you get the work-life balance right, so things that you put in place to manage your work-life balance will have an impact on you as a person in your out-of-work role as well. So I don't think specifically we would look at things out of work, but actually we're all humans, aren't we? And we all have to work within the realms of our daily life. So I think, you know, it would be we would be able to look at that in a wider sense.
We are now just 1 minute over our allocated time.
Yeah, we'd best go, because I think there's another session
there
going.
Is,
so
yeah,
if people want to do back-to-back sessions, there's a next session really on access to work for people with disabilities. So I'll leave it there. Thank you very much for your time. It's great to have that engagement that we've had today. Some really interesting sharing of knowledge there. Thanks a lot.
Thanks very much, everybody. Cheers.
Bye-bye.